All right, here is the 16 question reach back. Today is the second day before March break. It's Thursday. We have 16 questions, a reach back to your grade 7 for the most part, and a little bit of a smattering, if you will, of grade 8. I guess, yeah, grade 8 and grade 7. Good stuff. So your first question gives you a triangle and asks you to calculate the area as well as the perimeter. So for area, it gives us the formula here of base multiplied by the height divided by 2, or the way it writes it, BH over 2. It's the exact same thing. So the base in this particular triangle is 8. The height is 2. So we're going to go 8 multiplied by 2, and we're going to show that just by next to each other, divided by 2. And the nice thing about this, if you multiply by 2 and divide by 2, if you think about what you do in algebra, I technically could put lines through those because multiplying by 2 and dividing by 2 would give me 8. Or, if I didn't do that, I could actually multiply 8 by 2, but I'd still end up with 8 anyway. So the answer is the area of this particular triangle is 8 square units, or 8 meters squared if we consider them to be meters. The perimeter uses the formula side plus side plus side, or all three sides added together, or 2 plus 8 plus 10, which would be 20 meters or 20 units depending on what we use here. I think we did say we're going to use meters for the sides, right? Yeah. So 20 meters is your perimeter. In question 2, we have a rectangle that we know one of the side lengths, but we do not know the other side lengths. And it asks us to calculate the perimeter. So 5 multiplied by this number gave us the area of 30, so we know this has to be 6. The perimeter is made up of, if I use my highlighter here, 2 lengths and 2 widths. That makes up the distance around the rectangle. So 2 lengths would be 2 6s, and 2 widths would be 2 5s. This length and this length add up to be 12, and this width add up to be 10. So therefore the perimeter, or the distance around that rectangle, would be 22 meters. 22 meters is the perimeter. The next question, which a lot of people didn't understand, was your circle question. And in grade 7, I know you had the pandemic and you didn't learn how to do all of this work, but the formula for the area of a circle you might have learned is pi multiplied by the radius multiplied by the radius again. However, another way we could say that is when you multiply any number, or in this case a variable by itself, it can be expressed exponentially with an exponent of 2, meaning r multiplied by itself twice. And if I multiply it by pi, I can put the pi symbol in front of the r squared, and I know this means pi multiplied by r multiplied by r. So that's our formula. We're going to write down 3.14, which is the approximate value of pi, rounded to the nearest hundredth, multiplied by the radius. This distance here is called the diameter, and it's 12. So your radius is actually the distance from the middle of the circle to the circumference of the outside, which means that will be 6. And in BEDMAS, we're going to do our exponents before we do our multiplication. So we're going to have 3.14 multiplied by 6 squared. And since r squared means r times r, then 6 squared will be 6 times 6, which is 36. And pi multiplied by 36, or pi multiplied by 36, equals 113.04 meters squared. Question number 4 gives us a square and says, what is the area of this square? Now, we could have said just length times width equals the area of a rectangle or a square, it doesn't matter. But because we have sides that are the same length, we could technically say side times side, or 8 times 8. Or since we just talked about it in the last one, we can say 8 squared, which means 8 times 8, which means the area of that square would be 64 meters squared. Okay, leaving our area questions, we're heading into integers. This is a grade 7 question. It says, if I combine a positive 1, and I combine it with a negative 3, what would I get? After I make my 0 pairs, I would get negative 2. So the equation that you needed to write down was positive 1 plus negative 3 equals negative 2. And after a nice, interesting discussion on pause with chicken nuggies, we're back And we're talking about this one here, which is what integer equation is this? Well, these little arrows right here are showing that I'm removing groups. And removing three groups of is the first part of our expression or equation. And I'm removing three groups of -2. And when I do so, if I was to grab the eraser and remove those physically, I would be left with a +6. So -3 times -2 equals a +6. Our next question is an order of operations question with three different operations. Here we have an addition, we have a multiplication, and we have a division. So with those three operations, we learned that even though division should come before addition, we need to think of this question as do this first, get an answer, and then divide it by -10. So I'm going to treat that numerator as a number I have to simplify, which will become 2 plus -24, which will simplify to be -22. So now that I have that, I have -22 divided by -10, and ignoring the fact that you have signs, any number divided by 10, you simply take the decimal and you move it one place over, and you would end up with 2.2. Once you have that, look for your signs. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So therefore, your answer is 2.2. Your next question, three operations. Two of them are multiplication. One of them is addition. Multiply things out. I did my multiplication first. I maintained my addition between the two. 12 plus -48 is -36. Addition to fractions require common denominators. The first multiple that 4 and 5 share is 20. If I was to do this without, is exactly 20. So because that's the first multiple they share, that's called their lowest common denominator. So I'll write that down. And I will make equivalent fractions to both. 5/20ths and 4/20ths are equivalent to 1/4 and 1/5. Add your numerators to get 9. Keep your denominator. Your answer is 9/20ths. Your next question is the exact same question except subtraction. So the exact same equivalent fractions are going to be true. It's going to be 5/20ths take away 4/20ths. Subtract your numerators and keep your denominator. You end up with 1/20th. When multiplying fractions in grade 8, you learned that the easiest way to do it is to change any mixed fractions to improper. Once you are multiplying those fractions together, you can just multiply the numerators, you get 5, multiply your denominators, you get 20, reduce it to lowest terms, you get 1/4. Alternatively, smart people learned that they could reduce by cross reduction, in which case you still would have got 1/4 as your answer, no matter what you did wrong. Next question is division. So we still have 5/4 divided by 1/5. And in grade 8, we learned the easiest way to get the quotient or the answer to a division is to actually multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. Once we do that, we multiply the numerators to get 25 and the denominators to get 4, which will become 6 1/4 as a mixed fraction. Your next question is your algebra questions, which we are working on currently or just finished working on. And you're going to be doing a retest on this tomorrow. The question here says -2 is equal to 3 minus 1/3 of x. So the first thing we learned to do is get rid of your constant, which is your 3, by adding or subtracting that amount from both sides. I have -5 equals, this will become x over -3. Once we have that written, we're going to get rid of that -1/3 of x by multiplying both sides by -3, and x will equal a +15. Now this question here, my square fence is decreased by 5 meters per side. The new perimeter is 60. What's the old fence? So the first expectation is you draw your old fence. And since the new fence is decreased, it's going to be smaller, and it's a square. So the old fence, we're going to represent by the letter X, because the old fence was a square fence, and each of those sides was equal. The new fence, however, was decreased by 5 meters, which means the original length minus 5 would be its new length. And the only other piece of information that we're given is that the perimeter of this new fence is equal to 60. So we could say x minus 5 plus x minus 5 plus x minus 5 or x plus x minus 5 is equal to 60. Or we could say the perimeter of a square is equal to 4 multiplied by the side length, which is really your formula. Take the side length, multiply it by 4, and that would be the distance around. In the question here, we actually know our side length algebraically, and we know our perimeter numerically. So we could say the perimeter is 60, and 4 multiplied that side length of x minus 5 is what we're going to use. So what we've done is we've created this algebraic equation that I can isolate for x, and once we do, we're going to be able to figure out the perimeter of the old fence. I'm going to divide both sides by 4, because I don't want to know what 4 x minus 5 lengths are. I want to know what 1 is. And once I know that x minus 5 equals 15, simply add 5 to both sides, and x will equal 20. We're not done yet because the question says, what's the perimeter? What's the old perimeter? So once we know that, one of two things can happen. You can just take your eraser, erase all the x's, change them to 20s, add them up in your head, and you'll say the perimeter is equal to 80. Or if you're more sophisticated, the perimeter of a square is still 4 multiplied by the side length, or the perimeter is equal to 4 multiplied by the side length of 20. But either way you do it, you still end up with the answer. The perimeter of the old fence is 80 meters, or was 80 meters. Your next question says S equals 12 minus A over 4, which is a formula we figured out from the textbook, is what is used to determine how much sleep a person needs. I think it's under the age of 18, but I can't remember. It says Malcolm is 15. How much sleep does he need? So what we're going to do is we're simply going to take our formula and we're going to write it out. We're going to substitute the age of Malcolm into our formula where it says A for 15. We're going to simplify that 15 divided by 4 and we're going to get 3.75. And 12 minus 3.75 is 8.25. And the question is, how much sleep does he need? So this is where it gets a little complicated. Therefore, he needs 8.25 hours, or more appropriately, since a 0.25 is a quarter of an hour, 8 hours and 15 minutes. It's not 25 minutes because a quarter of an hour is 15 minutes. So 8.25 hours is 8 hours and 15 minutes. If it was 8.5 hours, we'd say 8 hours and 30 minutes because half an hour is 30 minutes. So the last question of the day is your formula for determining the temperature outside a plane based on ground temperature, based on altitude, and based on temperature outside of the aircraft. So T, this big capital T, stands for outside air temperature, which we know to be negative 40. Our small t, which is the ground temperature, we don't know, and we're asked to calculate it. And it says minus h divided by 150. Now the problem is I didn't write it out, but we all know that the height that is used in the formula is using the units of meters. And this question is giving us 7 kilometers, so we can't use that number. Since 1 kilometer equals 1,000 meters, then 7 kilometers would be 7,000 meters, which is the height that we're going to use in our formula. Once we've written that out, we're like, okay, this is the equivalent expression. This is the variable. There is no coefficient. And minus this number, which is the constant, but the only problem is that constant is not simplified. So we're going to make that constant into a regular number by taking 7,000 and dividing it by 150. And we're going to say that that actually is 46.6 repeating. So we have negative 40 equals 46.6 repeating. Grab all of this, add 46.6 repeating to both sides. Isolate the T, which is the ground temperature that we're looking for right here. And that equals 6.6 degrees Celsius, or 6 2/3 degrees Celsius, because decimal 6 repeating is 2/3. So therefore, the ground temperature is 6 2/3 degrees Celsius.